DC doesn't know what to do with Superman. They've said themselves that they can't figure out how to make a cinematic version of this character compelling to audiences. And I think I know why, or at least I've got an idea for one minor part of the puzzle, a part which has been more or less overlooked in the internet's attempts to critique this statement. They need to stop making Superman Jesus. Because that's kind of what they've been doing over and over again. It's got old, sure, but more importantly, the shoe doesn't really fit. In this video, we're going to do our best to figure out why not, and what's going on here more broadly. Throughout, we're going to be drawing on a few different sources, articles, blog posts, and more, and they'll be cited and linked in the description. But let's start by taking stock. What am I talking about when I say that Superman films like to make him Jesus? I'm mainly referring to the way that DC media, primarily their film division, really likes to create visual and thematic parallels between Superman, that is Clark Kent, Kal-El, and Jesus Christ, the Christian Messiah, water to wine dude. It's all over the DCEU's portrayal of the character, although perhaps most visible in Man of Steel. It's super visible in Smallville, in Superman Returns, and especially in the first couple of Christopher Reeve films. At points, the comic books have even lent into this linkage, with various moments in and around the death of Superman's story being phrased in the visual or narrative language of Christianity. And this isn't an accident or a secret. Plenty of the people responsible for these depictions have spoken candidly about these intentional parallels. We'll get more into the specifics later, but the basic level of this equivalence is, these are both commonly understood to be only children that came to the Earth from the skies, whose nature is split between a human side and a superhuman one, and who use both of these sides to try and help humanity in some way. You could also add that both of these figures stand today for a set of normative values, and that both are willing to sacrifice their lives for humanity. But these links do have a few caveats to them, which, yeah, we'll get to. So playing up these supposed links is pretty common, and hey, sometimes that works. Sometimes working with this allegorical layer in mind can produce a solid adaptation, which uses these grand spiritualistic implications to add a sort of mythic, archetypal significance to what might otherwise have been a kinda campy affair. Just look at that original film from '78. This stuff all comes together pretty nicely there. We'll come back to it later, and even when it's comparatively successful, there's some deeply fraught cultural issues with this type of approach. But on a purely cinematic level, Richard Donner and Mario Puzo used this allegory to construct a film that works. But the fact that these parallels can work does not mean that they always do. Yeah, let's talk about Man of Steel. Zack Snyder's first installment in the DCEU is complex in a lot of ways. I honestly don't hate this film, and that's due largely to the ambition visible in a lot of the choices the film makes. But I don't think there's much of that present in the Christ allegory this film hits you over the head with constantly. There's an article from EW which summarizes them nicely. For instance, Jor-El plays the role of the Old Testament prophet, promising fire and brimstone to a sinfully proud culture if they don't immediately change their ways. Having failed to save his world by convincing them to reform, Jor-El executes a more radical redemption scheme through his only begotten son. The father will figuratively and literally place creation on Kal-El's shoulders by imprinting the genetic record of his people on Kal-El. Through the son, Krypton will be born again. After an encounter with a veritable Holy Ghost, specifically an aspect of Jor-El presented as a hologram, Clark becomes the son of God / son of man that his father intended him to be. He accepts the suit the way Christ accepted the spirit, as electric Jor-El beams with sunshiny pride. This is my son, with whom I am well pleased. And with that, Kal-El explodes out of the closet and commences with being about the business of his father in heaven, because Jor-El is, like, dead, technically. The public ministry of Superman has begun, and it starts with an act of sacrifice on behalf of a world that he's been raised to believe will only fear, scorn, and hate him. General Zod, the film's force of antagonism, demands that Earth surrender the last son of Krypton incognito among them. Kal-El gives himself up, hoping that by doing so he can save Earth. He is 33 years old, the same age that Christ willingly went to the cross for the sake of the sinful human creatures that feared, scorned, and hated him. That's just some of the most obvious stuff. After this, he dies a symbolic death on the Kryptonian ship, and then we get that gratuitous crucifix shot. Thanks to some yellow sunlight, he's reborn, yep, like Jesus, to save Earth from Zod Lucifer. And look, I'm not against this heavy-handed parallel because it's heavy-handed. I'm against it because in this film, it's just a mess conceptually. It grinds up against the other non-Christ-based choices Man of Steel makes in an extremely jarring way. Perhaps most obviously, the snap heard around the world. No, not that one. This one. I'm not going to dwell on this because I have enough faith in my audience to assume most of you can spot why fake Jesus killing fake Satan, or fake Pharisees or whoever, undermines the link being made here, and because plenty have dwelled on it before. But the bad fit is visible elsewhere, like Clark's reluctance to do anything for most of his life, and his parents' insistence that he live normally. I don't even dislike this idea itself. It's been read in some interesting ways, including through a queer lens, but it's just weird in conjunction with the Christ stuff. If the equivalent to Jesus' ministry, his spreading of the truth in this film, is the way Superman inspires hope in the people of Earth, why does he do that precisely 0 times before the film's climax? He saves a couple of people, performs a few miracles, sure, but his whole deal is anonymity. He's doing good things, but it never goes past that, never to the level where a comparison to the Christian Messiah is warranted. There is actually one way that the film positions Clark as a genuine savior. Jesus held within him the ability to save all mankind. Clark, too, holds within him the ability to save an entire species. But in this case, it's the Kryptonians. The genetic codex of the species was imprinted upon him, or something. Alright, sure, cool idea. That actually brings some genuine messiah-ness to this character. Let's see what the film does with it.
If you destroy this ship, you destroy Krypton! Krypton had its chance!
Cool. Henry Cavill Jesus just doomed the species. Very Jesus-y, nice job, film. Sarcasm aside, in isolation, there's nothing wrong with this story beat, or the Codex plot more broadly, but it doesn't mesh at all with the Christ allegory Snyder is half-heartedly pursuing. And yeah, this isn't an isolated incident. We'll go on to talk about the underlying issues with the very idea of Superman as Jesus, but the way Man of Steel approaches this identification is fundamentally incoherent. I think on some level, Man of Steel kind of almost works as an exploration of the role of godhood in modernity, but that's small g godhood. Whenever the film makes a gesture towards Jesus or Christianity, and this happens a lot, it isn't able to say anything. And that's just Man of Steel. There's plenty more Superman-Jesus imagery in Batman vs Superman, and to a lesser extent, Justice League. However, post-Man of Steel, it somehow makes even less sense. Look, you know what I'm talking about. The spear, the death, the rebirth, etc. But Superman already had his Gethsemane moment, his sacrifice for mankind moment in Man of Steel. It's a lazy retread which fits even more uneasily into the narrative of these subsequent films and adds even less substance. Betsy Phillips, writing for The Hooded Utilitarian, makes an interesting point about the Man of Steel Jesus parallels. Jesus' story can be retold and reimagined, a crucial component for a good superhero story. But there is no tune in next time for another exciting adventure. Jesus is a one-and-done hero. When Jesus accomplishes his mission, the world is at its end. If Superman is Jesus and we saw his huge fight with his dad's nemesis, what's the plot of the next movie? As it turns out, the answer the DCEU has given us is pretty much the same thing. And you know what they say about diminishing returns. In BVS, Superman's death is powerful only as flimsy symbology. Nothing is actually achieved here beyond a big ugly monster getting killed, which Wonder Woman could have done too, and maybe some level of global inspiration, which was happening when he was alive. And the less said about Justice League's resurrection in this context, the better. I think the main reason Snyder mangled this symbolism so badly is that he took its existence for granted. He and David S. Goyer clearly thought the Christ parallels were an intrinsic part of the Superman mythos. Snyder's on record claiming that this link has been talked about since the creation of Superman. And Goyer said, quote, "We didn't come up with these illusions of Superman being Christ-like. That's something that's been embedded in this character since the beginning. Here's the thing. Technically speaking, that's bollocks. We'll get into the specifics shortly, but the idea that Superman has always been a Jesus allegory is fundamentally incorrect. This interpretation is a layer which was introduced externally to the character, decades after his creation. You could call it an extrinsic layer, as opposed to the way, say, Captain America symbolically represents the American self-image. That's an intrinsic part of the character, and every new version of Cap, every new Cap story necessarily negotiates this symbolism. Superman as Jesus, that's the opposite. To prove it, we're gonna take a little walk down memory lane with the help of this really useful master's thesis I found online. It's by a fella named Robert Revington. It's called Crisis on Infinite Texts: How Superman Developed into a Jesus Figure, and it's linked in the description. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a flawless piece of scholarship. I'm not entirely convinced by the way Revington approaches authorial intent, for instance, but it's a great resource for establishing the history of Superman and Christ symbolism, which, to quote the abstract, was not integral to this character as he was originally created, but was imposed by later writers over time, and mainly for cinematic adaptations. How did this Christ parallel come to be so commonly perceived as an intrinsic part of this character? Well, according to Robert Revington, it's about money. Big shock, I know. Basically, Superman wasn't created as the near-divine symbol of hope and forbearance that we're more familiar with. The original Superman was in many ways a fairly standard vigilante character, albeit one with superhuman strength and durability. His mission wasn't to inspire hope in humanity or anything so lofty, it was to beat up bad guys. Glenn Weldon says of Kal-El's early years, "He was a bully to bullies and a reckless one. He was, in point of fact, kind of a jerk." It's been speculated that this idea of a bulletproof man, all about stopping low-level crime, was on some level co-creator Jerry Siegel's response to the death of his father, who died after his shop was robbed. At the dawn of this character, the idea was that Superman would get his hands a little dirty, and in doing so make the world a slightly better place one act at a time. Indeed, this Superman was even political. Superman fought to improve workers' rights. Superman stopped war profiteers. Superman fought against the police to try and lift some kids out of a criminal cycle of poverty. Superman was class-conscious. Superman was based and praxis-pilled. As Revington observes, this whole shtick, violent direct action, is pretty far from the ethos of Christ. Gradually, this radical activism was dialed back, especially during the Second World War. The writers had to make Superman's ethics conform to authority, and Superman became more of an honorary policeman. This sanitization only intensified in the 50s, partially due to the influence of the infamous Comics Code Authority, and partially because Siegel lost creative control of the character. Corporate interests reigned, and more money stood to be made if Superman was subsumed fully into a milquetoast normative morality. As Thomas Andre put it, Siegel's original vision of Superman was radically subverted and a vapid establishmentarian hero substituted in his place, which the public ironically came to accept as the real Superman. The memory of Superman's existence as an outlaw and a champion of the oppressed would be virtually extinguished. But according to Revington, even at this point, Superman wasn't seen as a Christ analog. This gradual process by which the Kryptonian was pacified and integrated into middle-class American culture merely brought the character to a point where the Jesus link was within reach, so to speak, for later writers. And eventually this link was made by Donner and Puzo in 1978's Superman.
I have sent them you, my only son.
This film is the text for the Christ parallel. And if you want a more detailed summary of why this is the case, Revington's third chapter covers this in depth, and again, this whole thesis is linked below. This parallel was hotly contested at the time. A lot of Christians really didn't like it, but the reception of this film was so positive, the cultural impact so great, that people, both Superman writers and the general public, continued to see the character in this way, as the Messiah in tights. So a decade and a half later, when the writers over at DC decided to kill off Superman, they decked the story out in a loose visual and symbolic Christian dressing. And because that story sold so well, because they, killed Superman, these parallels became even more entrenched in the public consciousness. It really contributed to the way that Superman gets seen as intrinsically Christ-like. People post-Death of Superman see, on the one hand, a bunch of films and TV heavy with this symbolism, and on the other, a seeming basis for this in print. As a blanket rule, in the popular thought of comic book culture, comic books always tend to be viewed as authoritative texts, atop the hierarchy of influence, and so the idea that a film adaptation could have determined the course of such a popular and such a significant print story would seem foreign and unnatural to many, but that is what happened here. It's the same with subsequent adaptations. Smallville, Superman Returns, and of course the DCEU. To quote Revington's summary, the use of Christian symbolism in Donner's film paved the way for other Superman adaptations to do the same, and as we'll go on to see later, this linkage only became more lucrative as the years went on. Revington doesn't discount the possibility that biblical details, even perhaps the character of Jesus, may have been one inspiration during Siegel and Schuster's original creation of Superman, but there's really nothing to suggest that Christ specifically played a role, important or otherwise. There were plenty of other, clearly more significant factors than young crucifix here at play in the creation of this character. Circus strongmen, real-life experiences, boyhood fantasies, and of course, Siegel and Schuster's Jewish identities. I want to focus on that last part for a while, because I think Superman as Jewish American is one of the closest things this character has to an intrinsic allegorical layer. It's often been noted how the story of Kal-El, an immigrant from a far-off land living a double life in mainstream America, reflected the lives of many Jewish Americans around the start of the 20th century. As The Independent puts it, Superman channels the experience of many Jews bidding to assimilate in Gentile culture, veiling his heritage behind a new suit and a Christian name, Clark Kent, but always true to his roots underneath the social camouflage. Superman expressed, at least partially, the Jewish identity of his creators. He externalized their private experiences and anxieties. But don't just take my word for it, here's a direct quote from Jerry Siegel. What led me into creating Superman in the early 30s? Hearing and reading of the oppression and slaughter of helpless, oppressed Jews in Nazi Germany. Seeing movies depicting the horrors of privation suffered by the downtrodden. I had the great urge to help the downtrodden masses somehow. How could I help them when I could barely help myself? Superman was the answer. Look, this stuff wasn't completely blatant. Superman didn't really stand in front of menorahs and pose, but at the time this subtext was there, and sometimes it was barely subtext. In a 1940 comic, Siegel and Schuster had Superman take on the Second World War, and there wasn't any of the more modern non-interventionism or anything here. When the Man of Steel gets to the Supreme Leader, he threatens him with a, quote, strictly non-Aryan sock on your jaw. First, that's based as fuck, and second, Joseph Goebbels even publicly denounced Superman as a result, allegedly crying, "This Superman is a Jew." Yeah, in some ways, on some levels, Superman is a Jew. Such a powerful one that despite being fictional, he managed to make Goebbels whine like a bitch. This symbolic layer of the character didn't fade away after wartime though. If anything, it got stronger, and we'll talk a little more about that shortly, but to cap off this discussion about the intrinsic Jewishness of Superman, I think we need to talk about Moses. No, not that Moses. No, not that one either. I'm talking about the dude from Exodus, who's pretty clearly a way closer symbolic match for Kal-El than Jesus ever was. His people were dying, so his parents sent him away to an unknown land, an unknown family in a basket. Is that ringing any bells? Because yeah, it kinda should be. That hooded utilitarian article I mentioned earlier is a good read for outlining the way this allegory fits in a way the Christ one doesn't, and we'll be talking about some of its points specifically shortly, but yeah, go read it, it's linked below. Regardless, this Moses story is a clear inspiration for Superman, on both a narrative and thematic level, and it's probably the reason people started seeing Jesus in the first place, because the biblical accounts of Jesus in the Gospels are based in part on the older Moses story. It's also worth noting here that while Moses is an important figure in Christianity, he's far more central in the Jewish faith. But hey, the fact that this Moses Superman layer is far older than the Jesus one doesn't necessarily make it a more suitable one for modern interpretations of the character. After all, we just went down a whole rabbit hole about how much this character has changed over the years. Here's the thing though, it still fits way better. Remember that one and done quality that a committed Jesus allegory inevitably runs into? Yeah, that isn't present here. Moses' struggles against the Pharaoh were ongoing, before and after leaving Egypt, and then there was that whole wandering around stuff. The point being, if Superman is understood and approached as, in part, a Moses allegory, he doesn't have to win all at once forever. A transcendent victory is never achieved, it's a lot of little wins, without any divine eschatological fanfare waiting at the end. On a basic level, Moses didn't lead the Israelites out of Egypt because doing so would save the world. He did it because oppression and slavery are bad. Or rather, he did it because God told him to, but I'd argue that the text of Exodus makes it clear that the impetus behind this command was the pain and torture felt by the Israelites in Egypt. By the way, I hope you guys appreciate the depth of research here, because let me just tell you, the way Moses' acts are framed in the Bible on a textual level isn't knowledge I possessed a week ago. Either way, with Moses, the good he does isn't leading directly to the salvation of all mankind, it just leads to good. I'd argue that Superman as Moses, then, is an allegory fulfilling on a much more human level. The Moses template is a mortal one through and through, and a mortal man, albeit one blessed with powers, trying to do right by his people. Well, to me, that speaks to Clark Kent, to Kal-El, better than the more common alternative. He isn't an emissary of the heavens, a harbinger of a glorious heavenly apocalypse. He's helping to help, not to advertise the kingdom of his father. The ideal Superman represents is good for its own sake, not transcendent in any way. Once you jettison the idea of Superman as some quasi-divine messiah, the character is drawn far closer to both his original stories and to the audience. Betsy Phillips writes, losing sight of Superman's origins in a basket in the bulrushes means the filmmakers miss the importance of some of the very things they're depicting, and they miss opportunities to make Man of Steel into a richer story because they're drawing on the wrong archetype. Superman can have hope because he's corny Jesus dude made of hope, or he can have hope because the alternative is to give into despair. The second choice makes for a more real movie, and one that I'd argue is truer to Superman's roots, both mythically and in the lived realities of his original creators. Moreover, the Superman mythos even post-Donner is full of stories which explicitly reject the notion of Superman as Messiah, or anything close. To cite a well-known example, Red Sun isn't canon, but it goes all in on the idea that no, Superman isn't the ultimate savior humanity's been waiting for, and when he thinks he is, things go bad. And there's another storyline from the 90s which directly rejects the idea of Superman as the bringer of some heavenly utopia. So sure, characters can change, symbols can evolve, but the Superman-Jesus linkage pursued by these adaptations often struggles to match up in any meaningful way with this figure or the stories he's in. Outside of projects like Man of Steel, Smallville, or the first Donner film, the Moses parallel was never truly replaced by the Jesus one, and I think that fact is a helpful one to remember when thinking about the ways these cinematic allegories fail. It's also worth pointing out that this goes beyond Moses. Superman never fully lost that essential Jewish cultural layer either. Post-wartime, even as the earlier radical Superman was being assimilated into the culturally conservative climate of the 50s and early 60s, the character continued to function in part on this allegorical level. Take the story 1 Minute of Doom, for instance. Ari Kaplan offers the convincing interpretation that Krypton Memorial Day can be read as a metaphor for the Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah. Per Revington, an otherwise innocuous Superman story becomes a moving metaphor for the millions of Jews who died in the Holocaust, and for those still living who'd tried to process the tragedy. And there are more examples like this throughout the decades, some of which Revington brings up. Characters can change, symbols can evolve, and with Superman, one of the best examples of this is the new tragic meaning Krypton took on during the post-war years. After all, in the late 30s, when Superman and his home of Krypton were developed and introduced, the old world was lost but not shattered in the minds of the European Jews who'd migrated to America. 10 years later though, well, Krypton may have seemed a better fit. Even a half-century later, the link between Jewish American culture and the Man of Steel remained firm. For instance, an article in The Independent notes that Superman served as a recurring motif in the classic sitcom Seinfeld, perhaps the finest Jewish comedy of all, frequently invoked to provide a ludicrous counterpoint to the character's entirely selfish and petty motivations. One episode saw the cast encounter alternate reality versions of themselves, a nod to the Bizarro World storylines in the comics. And even in recent years, Superman is a character who's been used more than most to rebuke fascist ideas about genetics and purity. A while back I was talking to Mechanist Gamma, the patron who suggested the basic idea for this video, and he recommended I jump into the 2016 Superman run to get a feel for the best of the character's modern day writing. He's also got a pretty cool YouTube channel you should check out. As it happens, one of the first villains to pop up in the issues that I read was the Eradicator, who's kind of all about Kryptonian purity. A central issue for this modern Superman run was then a not so subtle nod to the sort of stuff that inspired Siegel and Schuster all those years ago. And hey, remember the Codex? Even Man of Steel was unable to make a really Jesus-y Superman film without butting into concerns like these. That is, of course, unless it wasn't an accident. There's enough little moments scattered throughout Man of Steel which seem relevant to the Jewish Superman reading to give me pause. There's the Codex and Zod's fixation on genetics.
You're talking about genocide.
Yes, and I'm arguing its merits with a ghost.
The way the film lingers on the plight of Superman's biological parents skews a lot closer to Moses than Jesus. Phillips makes the link between Moses' righteous murder and the infamous Zod kill. The ghostly presence of the Jewish Superman, buried somewhere beneath the film Man of Steel turned out to be, is still almost visible, almost tangible. I don't know how much of this was intentional, but I do think that on some level it was recognized, and the filmmakers steered away from this side of things when it became clear that it threatened to destabilize the Christ allegory. It was subordinated, and I think we can see the exact moment in which the film does this.
You'll be an outcast. A freak. You'll kill him.
How? You'll be a god to them.
This is the moment Man of Steel makes explicit its decision to jettison Moses and pursue the Christ allegory. But as we noted a minute ago, as Phillips explores in depth in her article, the Jewish substrate remains. Maybe it's too intrinsic a part of this character to ever fully remove. The spirit of the Jewish Superman is silenced maybe, but the ghost's still there, and it haunts this film. These remnants are the parts which gum up the Jesus allegory most clearly. The Codex, the Zodkill, and maybe most of all, the Krypton mismatch. Because how does Krypton function in the gospel retelling Snyder's trying to pull off? Is it heaven? It's gotta be heaven, right? But it's destroyed. The Holy Ghost survives, I guess, but the Father doesn't. No, it seems to me that this Krypton is much richer, much heavier with possible meaning outside the Jesus allegory. The film, though, appears to disagree with itself. The language and visuals of the film are committed to imagining Krypton as some kind of heaven analog, but there's no stable meaning here. Some of you might think I'm being over-literal in my attempt to read Snyder's allegory, but I'm just trying to get something here. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit, but it does have to be a fit. If there's no consistent meaning signified by an allegory, then it isn't an allegory, it's just a messy jumble of references. When 1978 Superman lent on the Jesus stuff, it had a reason. It coded Superman as Jesus in order to communicate this version of the character's ineffable goodness and indomitable spirit, his unconditional love for humanity. As in Man of Steel, the narrative doesn't make perfect sense with this allegorical layer, but it fits this version of Superman perfectly. That's the purpose of this film's blatant Christological tendencies. It works on a character level, if not a narrative one. It had a reason. Other examples, like Smallville or Superman Returns, are kind of a mixed bag on this front, but Man of Steel, the DCEU, the modern Superman that DC's backed themselves into a corner with, there was never a reason here for a Christ allegory. This Superman is not Christ-like. He doubts, like nearly the whole time. He doesn't automatically believe in the goodness of humanity. He's not innately compelled to spread his message. It doesn't service the narratives or the characters. So why go so hard on the symbolism? Why spend half the film trying to cram a square allegorical peg into a very round whole? As suggested above, if you take Revington's view on the matter, it's about money. On Man of Steel's release, Warner Bros. Invited church leaders to promotional viewings and gave them pages worth of notes on the religious subtext of the film. This time around, the Christians of the US were a lot more accepting of the symbolism. That's a big market to get on your side. Personally, I'm not convinced it was solely a financial decision, but whether or not the parallels here originated as a marketing ploy, they were certainly used as such with gusto. No, I think it's more likely that Snyder and Goya had just assumed that the character's linkage to Jesus was indeed an essential original part of the character. Maybe they'd heard it somewhere, maybe they saw the Donna film when they were kids, and that newly baptized vision of the character was lodged deep enough in their brains that when the time came to film their own version of the story, they repeated the allegory uncritically, realizing it'd lead to some cool shots, and not realizing that it's anything but an intrinsic part of Clark, and it wouldn't magically make their film deeper. There's a cool video by Center Row on this topic, and it concludes on a similar note. The idea that Snyder shot the film in this way because Snyder just loves splashy symbolism, and is maybe less concerned with thinking through what those shots may or may not end up doing for the film thematically. At the end of the day though, I think it's less important to investigate why these films decided to go so hard with this ill-fitting allegory than it is to investigate why the allegory itself falls apart so often. And on that front, after almost, like 30 minutes, I think we've got ourselves an answer. The reason the Jesus parallels so often fall flat, the reason they rarely hold up to scrutiny, is that they don't capture some original intrinsic essence of this character in the way that people like Snyder and Goya like to imagine. So unless you very consciously devote yourself to developing a film which reconfigures the character and their journey to match this Christian symbology like Donner and Puzo did, it's not gonna mean anything. It's not gonna work. It's about time for a conclusion, isn't it? How's this? You can use Superman as a Jesus allegory. Hell, you can even get a couple of pretty good films that way, but Superman isn't Jesus. This is not a link that needs to be made. In the abstract, it's not even a link that necessarily fits. And even if you do use Superman to explore Christian symbology and theology, that probably shouldn't be all you ever use him for. Partially because, hey, that's maybe kinda disrespectful to the character's deeply Jewish origins. Phillips makes a compelling argument for this phenomenon as a modern example of supersessionism, but also because it's a really narrow view of the character archetypically, and sticking to it so firmly really limits highlights the symbolic and narrative potentials of new Superman stories. And there is so much potential in this character. I don't know about you guys, but if DC announced that the next Superman film would take that original Superman as its inspiration, the guy who supported unions and fought cops, I'd be at the midnight release. Or keep the symbology, but lean into a Moses archetype instead. That'd fit. And at the very least, there's new ground there. Or rather, very old ground. I want to thank two of my patrons in particular for the topic of this video, Adam Myers and Mechanist Gamma. This video was born after the latter watched a Linkara video and spotted this moment, discussing the Man of Steel Jesus allegory.
Superman is Jesus, which, by the way, someone needs to do a deep dive video essay at some point, exploring how that analogy is dumb anytime it comes up.
In essence, that's what I've tried to do here. I'm not at all saying this video's the definitive take on this topic, but I think it's a solid starting point. A summation of the history of this equivalence, and some of its basic flaws. Did I succeed? Who knows? Let me know what you think below. But it's 1 AM on a Wednesday morning, and I've only got until the end of Thursday to get this whole thing recorded and edited, so I'd better stop here. Leave a like if you're cool, and shout out to all my patrons on screen now, especially Ian Fifield and Kevin Douglas.